أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. This is our 15th episode in Introduction to Rijal Studies. We continue our discussion on mass authentications, and one of the important mass authentications that Rijali scholars discuss is the companions of Imam Sadiq that have been mentioned by Shaykh al-Tusi. Shaykh al-Tusi, in his Rijal, he mentions the companions of each ma'soom. He begins with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he lists the name of his companions. And then Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he lists all of his companions, those who narrated from him. Imam al-Hasan and the companions who narrated from him, and so on and so forth, up till the final Imam, Imam al-Hasan Askari and Imam al-Hasan Askari, not the 12th Imam. And then the section on Imam al-Sadiq, the companions and narrators of Imam al-Sadiq, this is what we will be discussing here. It is said, there's a theory, that those whom Shaykh al-Tusi lists in the companions of Imam Sadiq of his Rijal, they are all authentic, they are all reliable, they are all trustworthy. Why is this? Why is it that all of the companions of Imam al-Sadiq are reliable and trustworthy? This requires several premises. The first is that, and of course, one of the scholars who accepts this mass authentication is Al-Hurr al-Amili in his Amal al-Amil. He says, وَلَوْ قِيلَ بِتَوْثِيقِهِ. He's speaking regarding Khalid ibn Awfa. He says, وَلَوْ قِيلَ بِتَوْثِيقِهِ وَتَوْثِيقِ أَصْحَابِ الصَّادِقِ عليه السلام إِلَّا مَنْ ثَبَتَ ضَعْفُهُ لَمْ يَكُنْ بَعِيدًا. He says, if we say that this person is reliable, and everyone else from the companions of Imam Sadiq, they were reliable and trustworthy, this is not far-fetched. How can we prove this mass authentication? This requires several muqaddimat, premises and introductions. One is that Shaykh al-Mufid, in one of his books, Al-Irshad, he says that the companions of Imam al-Sadiq were 4,000. They wrote their names. They were 4,000, and they were all reliable. So this is one. Two, Shaykh al-Mufid was looking at Ibn Uqda's book, and Ibn Uqda, he collects the names of the companions of Imam Sadiq. This is two. Three, Ibn Uqda's book did not reach us. The book disappeared. However, Shaykh al-Tusi in his Rijal, he collects the names of those collected by Ibn Uqda. So what Ibn Uqda mentions in his book, Shaykh al-Tusi mentions in his book, Al-Rijal. So it's okay that Ibn Uqda's book disappeared, as long as Shaykh al-Tusi in his Rijal, he collects the names of the companions of Imam Sadiq in Rijal ibn Uqda. These are three premises. That the ending result is that anyone whom Shaykh al-Tusi mentions in the companions of Imam Sadiq as a companion of Imam Sadiq is someone reliable and trustworthy. Now, these are premises that we have to prove. Come with me to see that, can we prove such a mass authentication? Were all of the companions of Imam Sadiq reliable and trustworthy? And anyone whom Shaykh al-Tusi mentions as a companion and narrator of Imam Sadiq, were approximately 3,000. 3,000 individuals. Are they all reliable and trustworthy? Let's find out. As for the first premise, Sheikh al-Mufid in his Irshad, he says, نقل الناس عن الصادق من العلوم ما سارت بها الركبان. People have gathered so much knowledge from Imam al-Sadiq. وانتشر ذكره في البلدان. And then he says, فإن أصحاب الحديث, the scholars of hadith, قد جمعوا أسماء الرواة عنه. Scholars of hadith, they wrote down the names of the narrators and transmitters from Imam Sadiq. عنه من الثقات, from the reliable men. أسماء الرواة عنه من الثقات, they wrote down and collected the names of the narrators from the thuqat, from the reliable transmitters. على اختلافهم في الآراء والمقالات, although they were very diverse in their opinions and their schools of thought. فكانوا 4,000 رجل, and they were 4,000 men. They collected their names, they were 4,000 men. This is the origin of this mass authentication. The origin comes from Sheikh al-Mufid in his book Al-Irshad. It says that Ashab al-Hadith, scholars of Hadith, they collected the names of the companions of Imam Sadiq from the reliable transmitters, and they were 4,000 individuals. Ibn Shahrashub, a famous Shi'i Rijali, in his Manaqib, he mentioned something very similar to Sheikh al-Mufid. Most likely he took it from Sheikh al-Mufid. And Sheikh al-Tabrasi in A'lam al-Wara, he mentioned something very similar to Sheikh al-Mufid as well. So some, they say that three made these claims: Sheikh al-Mufid, Ibn Shahrashub, and Sheikh al-Tabrasi. However, most likely that Ibn Shahrashub and Sheikh al-Tabrasi, they took this claim from Sheikh al-Mufid. So he's the origin of this claim. This is the first premise. The second premise is that Ibn Uqda had a book in Rijal in which he collected the names of the companions of Imam Sadiq and the narrators of Imam Sadiq. So the first premise is that the companions and the narrators from Imam Sadiq were all reliable and trustworthy. The second premise is that, well, how do we know who they are? Ibn Uqda in his book mentions the names of the narrators and companions of Imam Sadiq. Najashi, he says in his Rijal regarding Ibn Uqda, he says, له كتب منها الرجال وهو كتاب من روى عن جعفر بن محمد عليه السلام, meaning al-Sadiq. He has a book of Rijal, and in this book he collects the names of the companions of Imam Sadiq. Shaykh Tusi in his book Al-Fihrist regarding Ibn Uqda, he says كتاب الرجال وهو كتاب من روى عن جعفر بن محمد. He has a book called Al-Rijal in which he mentions the companions of Imam Sadiq, Ja'far ibn Muhammad. طيب. This is the second premise. The third is that Shaykh al-Tusi, well, Ibn Uqda, his book Rijal, it disappeared. It's one of the old books that didn't reach us. So how can we know which of the companions, who were the companions of Imam Sadiq that were reliable? The third premise, we prove that Shaykh al-Tusi, he collected the names from the book of Ibn Uqda. So he preserved for us those names and he took it from Ibn Uqda. He mentions, Shaykh al-Tusi in his intro to his Rijal, he says, وَلَمْ أَجِدْ لِأَصْحَابِنَا كِتَابًا جَامِعًا فِي هَذَا الْمَعْنَى إِلَّا الْمُخْتَصَرَاتِ. He says, I didn't find an extensive book on the Rijal, on the companions of the Imams, except some brief books. إلا ما ذكره ابن عقدة, except the book by Ibn Uqda, فإنه قد بلغ الغاية في ذلك. He made a major effort in this endeavor. ولم يذكر في رجاله باقي رجال الأئمة. وأنا أذكر ما ذكره. He says, but the problem is Ibn Uqda, he only mentioned some companions and he didn't mention others. Apparently, only Imam Sadiq's companions. Ibn Uqda's book is only regarding the companions of Imam Sadiq, not the others. He says, I took what Ibn Uqda wrote and I added to it. I added the companions of the rest of the companions. وَأَنَا أَذْكُرْ مَا ذَكَرُهُ وَأُورِدْ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ مَنْ لَمْ يَذْكُرْهُ. So Ibn Uqda's book is incomplete. I will add to it from the companions of Imam Sadiq and from other companions. Apparently, this is what he means by I will add to it. From this, we reach a conclusion that anyone that Shaykh al-Tusi mentions in the section of Imam Sadiq as companions and as narrators, transmitters from Imam Sadiq, they are all trustworthy and reliable. Why? Because what he mentions was taken from Ibn Uqda's book regarding the companions of Imam Sadiq, and Shaykh al-Mufid had told us that the companions of Imam Sadiq and the narrators and transmitters from Imam Sadiq are all trustworthy and reliable. This is the theory. This is the idea. However, some scholars rejected this theory and said it's impossible to give a mass authentication to all of the companions of Imam Sadiq, to all 4,000 companions, to all 4,000 narrators and transmitters, or to all 4,000 students. Imam Sadiq had 4,000 students. Can we say that they are all reliable and all trustworthy? This is unacceptable. So among those scholars who rejected this theory was Sayyid al-Khoi. And Sayyid al-Khoi mentions the following arguments. He says, number one, if what is meant by this theory is that all of the 4,000 students of Imam Sadiq were all reliable and trustworthy, then what's the difference between this theory and the theory of Adalat al-Sahaba that our Sunni brothers and sisters claim? The Sunni claim that all of the Sahaba, all of the companions of Rasulullah were udul, were just, were righteous. One of our problems with this theory is that you can't claim all of them were righteous. Rasulullah had over 100,000, and the definition of Sahaba in the Sunni school of thought is that anyone who met and saw Rasulullah, even for a minute, even for a day. Those who met and saw Rasulullah were over 100,000. All of them were righteous? All of them were good? It's not logically possible. Imam al-Sadiq says that, Sayyid al-Khoi says that this theory is similar to that. We rejected that theory, saying that it's illogical to say that all of the companions of Rasulullah were udul and righteous. Similarly, how can we say that all of the companions and all of the students of Imam Sadiq, all 4,000 of them, were thuqat, were reliable and trustworthy? It's illogical. You can't make such a general statement. This is one. Two, Shaykh al-Tusi himself tells us that some of the companions of Imam Sadiq were unreliable. For example, Ibrahim ibn Abi Habba, Al-Harith ibn Umar al-Basri, Abd al-Rahman ibn Halqam. These were students of Imam Sadiq that were unreliable. Shaykh al-Tusi himself tells us that they are unreliable. The third problem that Sayyid al-Khoi poses is that Shaykh al-Mufid said, Al-Ruwat min al-Thuqat, that Ashab al-Hadith, they collected the names of the narrators from the reliable men. Meaning that the reliable men were a lot more. These were just some, 4,000 of them, or only some of them. The rest, they could have been more. This is inadequate as well, Sayyid al-Khoi says. He says, because if he means that 4,000 were only the reliable ones, and Imam Sadiq had more students, but only the reliable ones were 4,000. This is unacceptable. Why? Because the Shaykh al-Tusi in his Rijal, he only mentions 3,000, not 4,000. So there's a discrepancy in the numbers. If the claim is that Imam Sadiq had more than 4,000 students, let's say 5,000 or 6,000, but only the reliable ones were 4,000, Well, the problem is that Sheikh Tusi only mentions 3,000 in his book. So, how is this possible? And Sayyid al-Khwa'i finally reaches the conclusion that we cannot accept this mass authentication for these reasons. And indeed, it seems that this mass authentication is unreliable. For the sake of how can Sheikh al-Mufid did not witness all of these narrators, all these companions of Imam Sadiq, the students of Imam Sadiq. How can he make a general statement like this, saying that all of the students of Imam Sadiq were 4,000, those 4,000 were all reliable and trustworthy? If there were 40, it's a possible claim. 400, it's possible. But to say that 4,000 students of Imam Sadiq whose names have been mentioned are all reliable, it doesn't seem like it's a logical claim. Yes, it's possible to say that most of them were reliable, most of them were trustworthy, most of them were good people, yes. But to say each and every single one of those 4,000 individuals were all reliable and thuqat, to the point that we don't need to look for authentications for them. As long as the Shaykh al-Tusi mentions their names in the companions of Imam Sadiq, we could rely on them. This seems to be far-fetched. We move on to another mass authentication. And this mass authentication is called Kitab Nawadir al-Hikma Wastithna ibn al-Walid. Nawadir al-Hikma was a book of traditions and narrations. It didn't reach us. This book disappeared. It's not amongst the books that reached us. And this is very typical. This is very normal for a lot of books not to have reached us. We're talking about over 1,200, 1,100 years ago that these books existed. The books that reached us, the reliable ones, are Al-Kafi, Al-Tahdib, Malahidh al-Faqih, Al-Tahdib, Al-Istibsar, Malahidh al-Faqih, the 4 books of Hadith, and others, some other books, old books that reached us. But there's lots of other books that didn't reach us. They weren't transcribed. So it's like a book that goes out of print and no one publishes it again. And those prints, they're either wasted or they exist in private libraries and no one gets to see it any longer. Kitab Nawadir al-Hikmah was a book of traditions, and the author was Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Yahya. The claim is this, that Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Yahya, in his book Nawadir al-Hikmah, he narrates from lots of narrators and transmitters, maybe over 700, maybe over 800. In fact, there are over 800. At least 800 narrators that he relied on. So this is a huge book. Muhammad ibn al-Hasan ibn al-Walid was a known Rijali and Hadith scholar. And he's the teacher of Shaykh al-Sadiq. To know what a special person he was, know that he was the teacher of Shaykh al-Sadiq. Muhammad ibn al-Hasan ibn al-Walid. We will call him Ibn al-Walid because a lot of their names are similar. Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Yahya, Muhammad ibn al-Hasan ibn al-Walid. In our last episode, we talked about Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Isa. So in order not to confuse our dear students, we will name this person Ibn al-Walid. Ibn al-Walid was a scholar of Rijal and a scholar of Hadith. He took Nawadir al-Hikmah by Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Yahya, and he said that there are certain individuals in this book that I will make an exception for. I will take them out. I will not rely on. But he didn't tell us why. This is the problem. He didn't tell us why he doesn't rely on these individuals. Some said, that, and this is how the theory developed, they said that Ibn al-Walid was a strict Rajali scholar, and him excluding certain narrators from Nawadir al-Hikmah meant that those individuals were not reliable. So what does this tell you about the individuals that he did not exclude? That means they were reliable, and hence the mass authentication. So anyone that Ibn al-Walid did not exclude from Rijal Nawadir al-Hikmah, from Nawadir al-Hikmah, he did not exclude them, he accepted them, that means they were reliable and trustworthy. They were thuqat. Those whom he excluded, he said he will not rely on, they were dha'af. They were unreliable and untrustworthy. So this is the gist of this mass authentication. This is the theory. Now this theory was accepted by some and it was rejected by others. For example, Sayyid al-Khoi rejects this theory, and we will see why. Shaykh as-Sanad, our teacher, rejects this theory, while on the other hand, Shaykh Subhani accepts this theory. Now, in order to understand this mass authentication better and to understand this theory, we need to know more about the author and the book, and to see what happened. Why did Ibn al-Walid exclude some of the narrators and why he didn't exclude others? So Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Yahya Najashi says كان ثقة في الحديث, he was reliable. إلا أن أصحابنا قالوا كان يروي عن الضعفاء ويعتمد المراسيل. And we see this pattern. Najashi says that our teachers, our companions said he's reliable in himself, but he relied upon a lot of unreliable sources, unreliable transmitters. ويعتمد المراسيل, and he would narrate narrations without mentioning the chain of narrators. ولا يبالي عمن أخذ, and he didn't care whom he quote. As long as he quoted, as long as he mentioned narrations, he didn't care who were the transmitters, as long as he had the narrations. So this is An-Najashi. This is quite important. So he himself was a good person, but his scholarly work was problematic because he relied upon unreliable transmitters. Sometimes he would narrate narrations without a proper chain of narrators, and he was careless as to whom he would rely upon. Sometimes he would rely upon reliable transmitters, and sometimes they were unreliable. This is regarding the author. As for his book, Kitab Nawadir al-Hikmah, An-Najashi tells us that this was a great book. Kitab Nawadir al-Hikmah وهو كتاب حسن كبير يعرفهم القميون بدبة شبيب. This was a huge book, and it was a good book, and it has everything. يعرفه القميون بدبة شبيب. The Qummis, people of Qum, they would call it Dabbat Shabib. Dabbat Shabib. Shabib was a person in Qum who had a cart, and he had a stroller, and he would walk in the streets of Qum, and he would sell things. And he had everything in his stroller. He had everything in his cart. Whatever you asked him for, he would take out from his cart and he would sell you. They would call this book Nawadir al-Hikmah Dabbat Shabib, the cart, the stroller of Shabib. So the same way that Dabbat Shabib had everything for anything that his customers wanted, he had, Nawadir al-Hikmah has everything, has all kinds of narrations. So basically, it would have fiqh, it would have aqa'id, it would have history, it would have usul. Whatever you want, it was found in this valuable book. Now, so where did we get this mass authentication? An-Najashi tells us that Ibn al-Walid is a huge scholar of hadith and Rijal. He's known as Nuqad al-Hadith. among nuqad al-hadith, meaning those that were very critical in their study of hadith and Rijal. So he didn't accept all of the hadith, nor did he reject all of the hadith. He was very critical. Ibn al-Walid, when he came to Nawadir al-Hikmah, he accepted some of its men, some of its transmitters, and he rejected others. Najashi says, وَكَانَ مُحَمَّدْ بن الحسن بن الوليد يستثني من رواية محمد بن أحمد بن يحيى. So the author of Nawadir al-Hikmah, Ibn al-Walid, he made exceptions. He excluded ما رواه عن محمد بن موسى الهمداني. Muhammad ibn Musa al-Hamadani, he excluded him from Nawadir al-Hikmah. He did not rely upon him. وَمَا رَوَاهُ عَنْ رَجُلٍ. And if the author says عَنْ رَجُلٍ, I narrate from a man, Ibn al-Walid said this is unreliable. أو يقول بعض أصحابنا. Oh, the author, when the author says I narrate from some of our companions, who were some of those companions, Ibn al-Walid said I don't rely upon that. أو عن محمد بن يحيى المعاذي. If he narrates from this individual, I will not rely on this individual, and so on and so forth. He makes a whole list, maybe up to an entire page, of exceptions Ibn al-Walid excluded from Nawadir al-Hikmah. And then, if we're not sure why was Ibn al-Walid excluding certain individuals and certain narrations, at the end, al-Najashi tells us, gives us a clue as to why Ibn al-Walid was excluding certain narrators. He says, قال أبو العباس بن نوح. Najashi tells us. Abu al-Abbas ibn Nuh was also a Rijali scholar. Abu al-Abbas ibn Nuh says that Shaykhuna Ibn al-Walid, Ibn Nuh was a student of Ibn al-Walid. He says that Ibn al-Walid was spot on. What he did was perfect by excluding certain individuals from Nawadir al-Hikmah, except in one. In Muhammad ibn Isa ibn Ubaid, he excluded him for no reason. Although Muhammad ibn Isa ibn Ubaid was reliable, he was adil, he was thiqah. Why did Ibn al-Walid exclude him? This is Najashi quoting Ibn Nuh, and Ibn Nuh is showing criticism of Ibn al-Walid. What does this tell us? And Ibn Nuh is a student of Ibn al-Walid. This tells us that Ibn al-Walid, when he excluded certain transmitters, because they were not reliable. Hence the astonishment from Ibn Nuh that why did Ibn al-Walid exclude Muhammad ibn Isa ibn Ubaid, or also known as al-Ubaidi? Why did he exclude al-Ubaidi? Al-Ubaidi was reliable. This tells us that Ibn al-Walid was excluding the non-reliables. Those that were non-reliable, he was excluding them. So anyone who was not excluded had to be reliable and trustworthy. This is the gist of the mass authentication. This is how it was formed. So the end result is anyone whom Ibn al-Walid excludes and says that I reject, they're not reliable. And anyone whom he didn't reject were reliable. And by the way, their number goes up to 646 individuals that Ibn al-Walid did not exclude. So those 646 individuals, based on this theory, are reliable. However, Sayyid al-Khou'i rejects this theory. Why? He says, we don't know why Ibn al-Walid excluded these individuals, and perhaps, and why he excluded those individuals, and why he did not exclude other individuals. Perhaps he did not exclude those individuals not because they're reliable, but because by default, anyone who's a Shi'i is reliable and just and righteous according to Ibn al-Walid and our former scholars. And I believe we talked about this before. Sayyid al-Khou'i has a theory. He says that formerly, pioneering scholars, they had something called asalat al-adala, meaning asalat al-adala for Shi'i. Then anyone who's Shi'i, by default, he's reliable, unless proven otherwise. So maybe Ibn al-Walid, he relied on asalat al-adala. he relies on those individuals because they're Shi'i, and so they're reliable by default. Not because it's been proven to him that they're reliable, but because by default they are reliable. So this is a Sayyid al-Khoi. Shaykh al-Sanad, he says we don't accept this theory either. Nawadir al-Hikma, استثناء ibn al-Walid من رجال نوادر al-Hikma, because those whom Ibn al-Walid excluded, he didn't exclude them because they were weak and unreliable. No, because they were known to be, they were known for forgery. They were known to be liars. They were known to have fabricated narrations. And the others, they didn't fabricate. They didn't have forgeries. It's not because they were reliable, thiqah. No, simply because they were not known fabricators. They were not known to be, they were not known to forge narrations. So there's a difference between, it hasn't proven that they were fabricators, or to say that they were reliable. There's a difference between the two. In the next episode, inshallah, we will assess this theory and try to give an opinion on it, inshallah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-Tahiri.